Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Professor Wendy Purcell. Lovely to have you with us. It really is great to have you in this fourth now in the series, the final one in our ISCM webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about strategic sustainability for change, and we're drawing our speakers as some of our chapter authors from our recent book, the Bloomsbury Handbook of Sustainability in Higher Education, an agenda for transformational change. Before we come to our expert panelists, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about the book. It came out in February. Let me just share a couple of slides with you. So this is the Bloomsbury Handbook. It was published in February of this year. And I think the premise of the book is very much that we take the sense that universities and higher education, really matter, and they are critical, they're essential, as it says here, to catalyze the action, the transformative change that we need to deliver on the agenda for sustainability and to deliver on the global agenda, Sustainable Development Goals. So this book, it was a privilege for myself and Janet Haddock-Fraser as co-editors to assemble a cohort of 65 different authors who came together to tell us stories from 30 different universities and colleges of higher education across 24 different chapters, many different countries, millions of student stories, and genuinely a global perspective. We divided the book into kind of two parts. The first part looks at how initiatives, agency realized by faculty, by students, by partners, can really drive change within a university setting, within a college, when they're using sustainability and adopting sustainability. It can help to drive change that can be across the curriculum, across the campuses, through their communities, in different ways, so within the institution. And then I think when we look at the second part of the book, we start to see how adopting sustainability can really be fuel for change beyond the higher education institution itself. So influencing others, working with their cities, working with the health sector, working on economic regeneration. So a real sense that that's kind of being the work of the universities are really being amplified through the work of others. And I think we also found that everyone's on a journey, different perspectives, coming in at different places and different spaces, depending on the institution. No one had arrived. So we were all sharing, I think, our stories for others to kind of look and see what works for them. What we had the opportunity to do was to distill out from those 24 chapters what we called a manifesto for change, which is the distillation of those 24 chapters, the messaging, the insights from that. And I thought it might be helpful just to frame some of this discussion on strategic sustainability in this way. So we found very much that the context of the institution, the place of the institution really mattered. So respecting the heritage, the nature of the mission, the place really mattered. Positioning sustainability not as something to do after teaching and learning or research innovation or civic and community engagement, but the lens through which you use to realize your academic mission. So the mission of the institution matters, and positioning sustainability as the lens to address your mission really mattered. Leadership, and you'll hear that today, and strategy really mattered. And looking at leaders, not just in that senior leadership team, but leaders everywhere, including students. And students really matter. The voices of students, their sense of agency, their sense of employability, their real, I think, concern to be set up by their institutions for success. So students really mattered. And being in this for the long haul, that sense that this is a long-term agenda, a long-term mission. So that sense of patience, just keep on going. And I think, again, you'll hear that today. Some of these stories of transformational change take decades. So patience and resolve really matter. The other thing that comes through very strongly from the stories is the sense of communication and dialogue, engaging people, unlocking what they care about, unlocking if their sense of whether it's their focus on teaching and excellence around research, or really working with their communities to uplift others, really creating spaces that community can come together, people can come together. That sense of building partnerships, what we called radical collaboration. So not just simple kind of connections, but deep partnership work that's relied upon. The other thing that emerged was our position as places of higher education, making sure we hold others to account. We use our critical analysis. We say what needs to be done, what should be done. We look at ourselves and call for more and better and different from universities too. So that sense of critical analysis, size, small and large, and everything in between in terms of activities. So it could be the individual decisions of an individual faculty member in their classroom that was the spark of a major transformational change. It could be a top-down driven strategic intent to engage with this, and everything in between. There was a real sense of small and large initiatives joining up to become the change we want to see. And I think finally, that sense that universities and higher education really matters. And so that was the kind of sense of the deep messaging that came out across those 24 chapters. But I think what we want to do here, and I'll just stop sharing, is to come in and talk really with some of the authors of those chapters. So it's an absolute pleasure for me to invite my panelists to give some thoughts and give us some insights from their chapter. If we can just remind you that if you want to add any comments or questions, please use the chat box. We'll get to as many as we can. And so great pleasure to have you with us, Alice Aiken from Dalhousie University in Canada. And so Alice is here to talk to us about their chapter, which was called Framing a University Research and Innovation Strategy around the SDGs. So Alice, can I invite you to take us on?
Yes, certainly, Wendy. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be here and for actually inviting us to write a chapter in the book. So I'm the Vice President for Research and Innovation at Dalhousie University. And just to set the context for you, Dalhousie is one of what in Canada we call the U15, the 15 research intensive universities in Canada. We are the smallest of the U15, but we would be considered a mid-size university in Canada. There's about 20, we have about 21,000 students here. So we are very much a university of place. We are located right on the east coast of Canada. We're very, very well known for our ocean research, as well as our battery technology research, along with many other areas. We have a medical school, a law school, every faculty you can imagine, arts and social science, health, dentistry, etc. So engineering. We are part of the APLU in the US. We have a faculty of agriculture as well, just to set the stage there. So I came into this position 6 years ago, and we launched our strategy 5 years ago. We're doing a refresh right now, so I will talk a little bit about that as well. But we were the first of the U15 to overtly frame our research strategy within the Sustainable Development Goals. And, the reason was we had, in doing the consultations across campus, somebody said to us, we always talk about solving the world's wicked problems, and, who are we to say what those are? And I thought it was a very relevant point. And we started thinking, well, let's have a good guideline framing us. It really has, I would say it's caught on very well across the university. We've had faculties frame their individual strategies in the SDGs. And in our new university-wide strategic plan, they speak very much about responding and working towards the SDGs. And I'm very happy to say now, one of the things we did was we put the SDGs in as keywords in our grants management system, and 77% of our grant applications now cite an SDG as a keyword. And in analyzing our publications through one of the big networks, we've found that 40% of our publications actually relate specifically to an SDG. So some of the key things, just 3 really key points that we took away is it's really important to understand individuals' motivations to engage in sustainability research. So some are driven by curiosity, some it's an ethical positioning, some there's an institutional incentive, we put it as keywords, or, deliver enhanced standing. But really what the most important thing is engage people. That is the critical point, is engage people regardless of the reason. We also have really realized that transformational change can start with incremental change in pockets within an organization. So I noted some of our research areas. So in the sustainability rankings, we are always in the top 10 in the world in ocean, clean water, battery. We do exceptionally well in those pockets, even though everybody in all the research areas are committed. And I will say, are committed to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I will say what's quite interesting is that we ask people to cite, when we do surveys as well, what sustainable development goals are you working towards? And the one that always from people from every faculty speak about is number 3. I think people really understand that good health and well-being, almost all of our research relates to that. So, in creating the institutional legitimacy and thinking about change, it really has required a lot of coordination and consistent messaging. So all of our advertising about research, everything cites the SDGs that person is working towards. We've used it very much as our framing moving forward, and we speak about it in everything we do about our research. And so we also found that, very interestingly, the approach to the SDGs has to be both top down. There has to be senior leadership commitment to it, but it has to be bottom up. People have to understand and want to do the work. And so in this way, that's an ideal way for any strategic direction to work, but it really is very, very important for the Sustainable Development Goals. And I will say that we're very proudly hosting our first 17 Rooms event this fall with our local community. The city of Halifax is participating with us. So we're very, very pleased about that. So I could go on forever, but there are other super interesting speakers for you to listen to. So thank you, Wendy.
That's excellent. Thank you, Alice. And if you want to jot down the Brookings 17 rooms in the chat, it's a great initiative, so you're going to have a lot of fun doing that. But the thing I really loved about the story was just how invitational you all were. There was a real sense of this, here's an agenda that's signed off kind of globally, and that invitation, you really drew people in. So you talked about engagement, and I thought it was excellent. So thank you very much for that. So thank you, Alice. So I'd very much like now to move to David Nwogbo, who are on the National Open University of Nigeria, to tell us about their chapter on Nigerian universities and achievement of the SDGs. And I'm hoping, David, we have you fully on sound. I can see you. So if you want to unmute and offer your comments. Now let me just see about sound. So Jen, I might just see if we can sort out the sound a little bit better with David. So David, I'll come back to you in a moment. and see if we can just clean up that sound a little bit. So what I'll do is we'll wait to hear your comments. I'd very much like to move to invite colleague Harro von Blottnitz from the University of Cape Town, South Africa, to tell us about his chapter on leveraging excellence to support sustainable development in Africa. So Harro, if you're able to unmute and take us on, that'd be fabulous. And we'll come back to you in a moment, David.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Wonderful opportunity to speak to you and the ISCN audience today. The University of Cape Town is an ISCN member, so lovely to be on this platform. I'm speaking about things that university leaders, without ever having occupied a university leadership position. I just wonder whether David could be muted. Thank you. I'm a professor in the engineering faculty and have been here for 25 years. And so I guess that gives me a vantage point to see how successive generations of university leaders have engaged and succeeded or not in transforming the university to rise to the challenges which sustainable development really poses for us. So my chapter explores the relationship between academic excellence, transformational change, and sustainable development in the context of UCT. And the audience probably knows this, that the University of Cape Town has consistently been ranked as Africa's top research university. My chapter starts with just putting into context what transformation means in post-apartheid South Africa. I think that is very important. As the book deals with transformational change. And so transformation carries a very particular meaning in post-apartheid South Africa and also very much so in the higher education sector. On the one hand, it has a very explicit and legal character in terms of employment equity. That means changing who's actually the face of the university. And to be very blunt, people who look like me used to make up 80% of the university senate, that is of all the full professors. I mean, people of European descent and male, in a country where we would make up, in terms of both gender and what is called race, would make up 5% of the population or less. And so this has been a very important and challenge and an ongoing one. That who gets to teach, who gets to participate and talk really is changing, but the change is a hard one and a slow one. That, of course, also then goes into what is being taught. So transformation is also about the identity of the university in a world that after 2015, when the roads must fall, protests really erupted around our university, that has really started to challenge past injustices and how those still live on in the present. And in my chapter, I just asked that question as well, to what extent we can actually hope to achieve sustainable development and the goals if we don't address these past injustices. So that's a starting point in my chapter. I then go through 3 case studies of matters that I've observed. They're not exhaustive, of course, in a very rich history of an institution that has 30,000 students and a couple thousand faculty. But the first case relates to the establishment of what we call the African Center for Cities, a research center around 2007. And over a period of 5 years, also the coining and inclusion in the university strategy of the term of an Afropolitan identity for the university. And so this essentially is bringing out a realization that Africa is a very fast urbanizing continent, and that much of the research around sustainability and the efforts around sustainability came from a romanticized position of people in rural areas and villages and their interaction with wildlife, and not and those remain very, very important topics. But the fate of 500 million urban slum dwellers on the continent is something that really needs huge attention in terms of the goals. That came out much later. But that is the first case that I write about. The second case is post-2015, when the SDGs had been formed, an action by our research office, led by a Deputy Vice-Chancellor, to take a very dry research report that's a statutory reporting requirement and structured in terms of the SDGs. It was that event which really brought through for university management just how strongly faculty had been involved in many of the SDG drafting processes as experts from Africa. That was as a case that I just review, and what that meant for the institution when the research report suddenly was a series of 17 glossy brochures rather than a very long dry report with lots and lots of journal publication citations, which probably still exists. But and the third case that I review is us hosting an SDG Africa summit, which originally we had planned to do in 2020 in March. And so it was the first high-profile victim of the pandemic and the lockdowns. But we did run it in an online version in September 2021. And the uniqueness about this is that we ran this event on the back of 3 global networks that the University of Cape Town is a member of. It's the International Association of Research Universities with just 11 members, and us being the first member from the Global South, whose presidents were supposed to be hosted by us in March 2020 here in Cape Town. And so we were going to use that opportunity to also bring in members from a network that we had co-founded called the African Research Universities Alliance, and then from the World Universities network, which has a very strong Africa development, sustainable development working group. And so we were going to matrix the invitation so that we make these 3 networks really work. And that is the central point where I say leveraging excellence in the title of my chapter. We have very strong African networks as Africa's leading institution, but we also have very strong global connections across multiple research centers in the university. And that is the strategic call, that the development challenge in Africa remains so great that a single university can't do it. But bringing people together who ought to be together is a big contribution that we're trying to make here from the University of Cape Town in a very explicit way. Wendy, that's probably my 10 minutes. If there are questions later on, I'll get back to more that's in the chapter. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think your chapter really highlighted that sense of heritage and place, and also I think the convening power of universities. But I was really pleased to see the excellence in the title as well, because often we see this as another mission that somehow outwith the institution. So I thought it was great. Thank you very much, Harro. So I'd like now to turn to our next speaker. That's Jim Longhurst from the University of the West of England in Bristol, UK, to tell us about their chapter, which was called A University's Transformational Change Agenda. It was a long story, so it gives us a real sense of that patience and resilience, Jim. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Thank you for the invitation to share this platform today. And actually, my thanks to Alice and Harro for fascinating contributions to this webinar. So I must acknowledge my co-authors on the chapter, Georgina Goff and Ian Brooks, and Ian is in the audience today. My job at the University of the West of England is as Assistant Vice-Chancellor for Environment and Sustainability. And whilst I have a proper job description, I jokingly describe that's a license to meddle in everything the university does, because there is nothing that a university does that does not embrace the ideas of sustainability. And if it doesn't, you shouldn't be doing it. So give you a little bit of context, the University of the West of England in Bristol, it's about an hour and a bit to the west-southwest of London. We have somewhere in the region of 30,000 students, around 4,000 staff, an annual budget of around about £335 million. And we organise ourselves across 3 campus locations in the city of Bristol and in the area known as South Gloucestershire. And we also organise ourselves into 3 colleges: arts, technology and the environment, health, science and society, and the College of Business and Law. Some of those you will note have very direct sustainability engagements, and others one might think slightly more peripheral, but actually in all cases and in all contexts, they are deeply embracing the ideas of sustainability. As an institution, whilst we trace our origins back to the 16th century, we are a very modern university. We took our university title in 1992. And shortly after that, the institution developed its first environmental policy. And we've been at this nearly 30 years now, progressively taking forward ideas of environment and sustainability into the policies and practices, if you like, into the living culture of the institution, so that sustainability isn't some useful add-on after you've done anything else, but actually is part of the decision-making context for the university. That doesn't mean we always make the right decisions, but it means I get the chance to say, I told you so, at the end of the process. So as I say, we've been at this for about 30 years. We've gone through a number of iterations of strategic direction for the university. We're currently in Strategy 2030, a decade of transformational change for the university, and one in which we've set ourselves some very significant sustainability ambitions that address the way we organize ourselves as a university in terms of our estate, in the way in which sustainability infuses the curriculum, in the way our research addresses global challenges, using the SDGs as a lens to manage, cohere and direct our activities, and in the way in which our engagement with partners, from the very local in the hinterland of the university through our global relationships, where we have something like 8,000 students studying UWE degrees in their home country. In all of those, and in our relationships, particularly with our Students' Union, we bring sustainability as close to the fore as we possibly can. And it's really interesting to mention the Students' Union, because it is students who are so critically aware of the sustainability challenges that the world currently faces, but they are much more aware of the fact they will be living their life course the next 60 years, for example, for a UK graduate this summer. They will be living through the consequences of the global environmental crises of the climate and biodiversity. And they know that it is higher education that needs to help them prepare for that life course. And so we as an institution, working closely with our student body and their representatives in the Students' Union, we take that challenge and we try and cohere the way in which we deliver our education for those students is helping them to understand and then to be adaptable in the face of those future challenges. And so just a few examples of some of the things that we have been doing. We're very proud that it's not just me that says, aren't we doing well? We put ourselves forward in terms of external certification. So ISO 14001 2015, the Global Environmental Management Standard, where we are about to be recertified this summer. So I'm slightly anxious in case something that we hold very dear might not be as good as we had been in the past. I hope that isn't the case, but we have new auditors who will run the rule over us. And interestingly, we were the first university in the United Kingdom that added our teaching and learning into our environmental management system, so that the claim we first made in 2015 that every program of study, undergraduate and postgraduate taught, embrace sustainability in the context of their discipline, that was auditable by our external auditors, and I'm delighted to say that they confirmed our claim that sustainability was present in those programs of study, and we have hundreds of programs of study. So that was a great relief when that was confirmed, and we have maintained that ever since. Now, more recently, we've started to use the SDGs as a means of exploring the contribution of each and every one of our programs of study. And to date, we've produced, I think it's in the region of 90 curriculum maps that explicitly identifies the contribution that each degree program is making to the suite of SDGs. We see it's critically important that we don't cherry pick an SDG, but we actually think of them as an integrated set of 17, if you like, an indivisible set. And we should acknowledge the contributions we make that are positive, but we should also note the negative impacts that a degree program may make to one or more of the SDGs, and then use the opportunity for the conversation that that can engender to think about how we might be able to minimize those negative impacts while maximizing the positive gains across the suite of the SDGs. Like Alice, we also are capturing the contributions our research makes to the SDGs, and on our website you will see our Breaking Research Boundaries case studies, where the SDGs that we contribute to are foregrounded. And if I have my way, we'll also say something about the negative impacts in due course as well. But we also capture the contributions through our research repository, and we're in a culture change process where we're trying to ensure colleagues in depositing materials to our research repository do fill in the SDGs that they are contributing to as well. And I'm very proud that in our estates developments, we've been investing in the last decade over 300 million in the main Frenchay campus. And we're currently building what we understand to be the world's largest passive house student accommodation on our Frenchay campus. That will open in September of this year. And I cite that not as a sort of show off thing, but actually it tells you something about the way in which the university understands the place of sustainability and the need to place in its investment decisions a very high premium on doing the things that are right, not just for today's bottom line, but actually for the long term of the planet that we share with so many others. So all those things, I hope, help you to understand just a little bit about how this institution's transformational journey has grown over the last 30 or so years. It doesn't stop. And it will, I hope, continue to move in the right direction. As Wendy said earlier, this isn't a destination any of us have arrived at. We're all in our own context, finding the way that works for our set of unique circumstances. But there are things that we have done, just as things that Alice and Harro and David's institutions have done, that we can share, we can learn from, we can say, oh, that would be interesting to try in our specific context. It may not work as well as it did in Cape Town or in Halifax, but it will be interesting to try. And that is the great beauty of the book that Wendy and Janet have brought together. It creates those opportunities to learn from so many different institutions, so many different cultures, and to take the learning and to share it where we can. And so with that, Wendy, I think I've probably exhausted the contribution that I was allocated, but I hope that was helpful. Thank you.
Never, never. That's fantastic. And I think the UE story does show how, and this is not to, to make you blush, but just show how that champion can really marshal, the whole institution. going forward. So, I mean, I think, you know, it has been a remarkable story of just sheer kind of keeping going and creating now what is a strategic, you know, agenda, as you described. And also, I think putting the student piece there, you know, that partnership with the students and the Students' Union has been such a powerful part of that story. So really phenomenal. I think David is still struggling just to find a spot to come back in so we can hear him clearly. But I do want to identify, you know, the deep learning from his chapter, which was from the National Open University of Nigeria. And the story in that chapter was really a call to action, Nigerian universities and achievement of the SDGs. And David is really clear in that chapter that Nigerian universities need to step up and do more and prioritize the SDGs. And he sets out a very clear blueprint for that agenda. You know, talks about the toolkits, talks about the opportunity to really ignite innovation through the university. And actually, I think, as all of our speakers have said, David calls really for that social responsibility of universities and societal betterment, and so sets out a very clear agenda, not only for what universities in Nigeria are doing already, they're doing a hell of a lot, but that opportunity to do more and go deeper. So David, we really thank you for all your efforts this morning to get online with us, and we look forward to ongoing collaborations with you. So a couple of questions maybe for our panel that relate to that sense of that manifesto for change. I think you've all given such powerful examples of the strategic intent that the SDGs can be used and sit well with, you know, the deep engagement that Alice talked about, that sense of excellence that Harro talked about, and I think that sense of deep kind of engagement as well that Jim reflected, and a social responsibility that Jim reflected as well. But if you were starting from here, what advice would you be giving in this space? And maybe we could just go around in the order that we heard from you. But what do you feel from, you know, that deep experience that you will bring to this agenda, and that sense of wins and losses that you will bring to this agenda? You know, what advice would you have people who are starting where they are now to really begin this process of changing their institutions to make sure they set their students up for success, that they deal with the wicked research problems and the problems of our world, that they really position, as the SDGs do, you know, creating a world that leaves no one behind, to that sense of betterment, you know, globally. So maybe Alice, if I come to you, and then Harro, and then Jim, just thinking about advice that you would offer. And as Jim said, the book does so humbly, and we do so humbly. None of us have all the answers, or we have some good questions, but we have some answers. So able, Alice, you just give us some advice on where you would start if you were listening to this webinar and you're thinking, actually, this sounds like something our institution should be doing more of. So Alice.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Wendy. You know, it's really interesting. There's a couple of things I would say. First, educate yourself on the SDGs. I think it's really important first step. And so that was a big education step for me, learning about the SDGs and really reading into it. And I mean, there's a ton of resources online, but also speaking to other people who've gone before. So I didn't have a university in Canada I could rely on at the time, but there were several in Norway that I spoke with who were really framing their strategies in the SDG. And I asked them, you know, what does that mean other than a feel-good thing? Like, how do you really implement that? And how do you, you know, ensure that people understand why we're doing it? And so that was very helpful for me. And I also found, as soon as we came out and did that publicly, of course, like I'm sure every university, we had pockets of researchers working with the Sustainable Development Goals already. And they sort of came forward and were able to provide advice and provide that sort of bottom up, engaging their peers, and working with us to learn about it. So I think that was very helpful from my perspective, I think as a starting point.
Alice, can I just, reinforce how important, what you just said is, because I see too often universities kind of, coming to sustainability or the SDGs from an agenda of like this brand new idea, and assuming that somehow their university students and faculty and staff, aren't already engaging in some of the, the big energy challenges or the big health challenges or the big, challenges around inequity. They've been working on these things for a long time. So I think that's what's so lovely about not only the story of Dalhousie, but what you did was create that sense of, here's a framework and you can hang your pieces on it, and the framework is, situated as, within the SDG. So that sense of recognizing what's happened already, and that you're building on this foundation of excellence, as we heard from Harro, but excellence in ocean science or whatever, in Dalhousie's case as well. So I think that's such an important, piece of advice. So Harro, if you could take us on, and also there's a fantastic question here from Alessandra Brito, who talks about, what are your suggestions for countries like Brazil, where there are these, material inequalities and little investment? And again, you talked about that journey within the African kind of potential of, historical inequities and divisions. And so there might be some resonance there. So maybe you could give us your advice, but also reflect in that space. Thanks, Harro.
Thanks very much. Yeah, Wendy. Advice, we're talking here, about, I guess, advice in terms of strategy, leadership, people coming into leadership positions, who may be on the call, who's saying, what can I take out of that? So, always important to preface, how one answers a question. But yes, absolutely. The first bit is, of course, this is not a new agenda. In my chapter, I say the start of the third decade, led us to 2015 and the SDGs. We're now past the start of the fourth decade, if we count since Rio. So it's been here a long time. So obviously, ground yourself in where this thing comes from, and how much has already been achieved, and importantly also what's not yet been achieved. Where have been the sticking points? We will go over 1.5 degrees very soon, and the whole development effort was thrown back by a decade through the pandemic. So the second bit is then, as you try to ground yourself, is if you're in university leadership and you're trying to craft strategy here, is do go to the scholars who have been in these agendas for a long time. Try to get the important insights there. But I guess, and that's not so much in my chapter, I'm hearing it here, also go to the students and the young people and ask them what frustrates them and what are their fears and what are their hopes for their education. And then a piece of advice that's the first point on my conclusions in my chapter that I think is important here is look for alignment with other important socioeconomic agendas. They may look different, but they actually should be aligned. Much of what we're grappling with in important agendas really is about sustainability and sustainable development, and I always still go back to keeping the development term in the sustainability, because that is for us on the African continent where the deficits in development remain largest in the world, and where capacity arguably to address this remains thinnest. And this is then where I come back to use the partnership idea. Your position in university leadership really should allow you to find people who want to come and help, but who need to be brought through a door that has the authenticity and the authentic understanding of what the problem actually is, not just, well, I've got a fancy tool, let's go and help some people who need it. That, I think, remains a very important role for the African university, to know the context, but to also, through the excellent education that faculty have had and had enjoyed, to be able to tap into the global networks and to find the right person, not the first one who's written a wonderful grant application, but find the right group and expertise for the particular problem. Thank you.
Fantastic. I mean, that's such wise advice, you know, to bring your scholars, you know, into that conversation, that dialogue, but also not to forget our kind of critical evaluative skills, you know, as scholars as well, of saying who's not at the table, what's not in the SDGs, what needs to happen next, you know, what's not written around sustainability, what are we not doing, you know, really holding, you know, ourselves to account, but also adopting, I think, that critical stance, I think, is so important. Jim, there's also a question, just seeking your advice really on starting, you know, what advice you would give, but also John is asking a question, you know, as you're talking, how can we, you know, convey the messaging and include students, but recognize, I think, what I think we've all, you know, felt and know about is the, you know, the growing concerns around eco-anxiety and climate anxiety is kind of fueled also on the back of, you know, growing mental health issues coming off the pandemic. So how can we, you know, upskill and give a sense of the state of the issues, but not, you know, really fuel genuine anxiety that's out there. So maybe you can give us some advice, but also talk about that engagement with students, how you bring them in a way that empowers them, really.
I'll come to John in a moment. Just a couple of comments on your initial question. And I'd be amazed, even if it was a university who thought they were absolutely new to the sustainability agenda, that there wasn't a lot going on already. It's just a question of conversations across the piece with academic staff, with professional service staff, with students. I think my job is as much about going and talking with people as it is about any great strategic insights. And it's those conversations that will enable you to find the true nature of the engagement that already exists, to understand the appetite for change that exists, to understand something about the barriers that inhibit that change, and to be able to work with the allies that you have developed through those conversations, to be able to plot ways forward that are contributing to the SDGs and minimizing the negative impacts that you will also have identified as you went through those conversations. And John is absolutely right in his comment. He will, you know, we will find in those conversations that there are many students who are deeply concerned about the impact of the changing climate and the ecological crisis on the life course that they will live to the end of this century, and in some cases, no doubt, beyond. So how do you address that? Well, the first thing is acknowledging that these are really serious existential threats. But actually, we then need to find ways of talking about stories of hope. What is there that can change that narrative from one of concern, indeed anxiety, into one where agency can be identified by the individuals? And this is a way in which we can then begin to change that narrative from concern and personal anxiety into one where opportunity, particularly if through the program of study or through extracurricular activities that the university offers, such as volunteering with environmental or sustainability charities in the city or hinterland of the institution, if we can begin to cohere those types of activities alongside activities that will support a positive opportunity for change, and learning how to adapt to those things that we can do little about. We're already committed to at least 1.5 and probably, unfortunately, a great deal more of temperature increases by the life course of a typical student leaving our institutions today. So we need to have helped personal resilience to have been developed across the course of their studies with us. We need them to understand the importance of adaptation to those changes and how in their private as well as in their professional lives, those things can come to the fore. It's not easy. I'm not pretending that it's easy, but those are the challenges that we face. And as academics, it's our job to make sure that we rise to those challenges to the best of our abilities.
Yeah, and that sense of hope. I mean, there is a wonderful quote, I won't remember by whom now, but that talks about leaders as peddlers of hope. You know, and I think that is really important. But I think you're also pointing to the sense of our responsibilities to not be thinking about this as a future agenda. It's here now.
It's here now.
We're grappling with these things now. So setting our students up for success, that sense, as you say, of literacy around climate and sustainability and resilience and adaptation, and those are all kind of graduate level skills. They're all just life skills, aren't they, in the way that you describe? Yeah.
I'd add one thing. Sorry, I just
ahead.
say that it's business as usual is no longer tenable.
Yeah. So we have a great question, and I have a slide in my slide deck when I do this stuff, which has the kind of 2030 agenda, and I always update it to the date, to the date I'm giving the lecture, and it's, getting shorter and shorter. So Ian is just reminding us of, we're halfway through, 2030 is around the corner, and I don't know, if many of you realize it's nearly June already. It was only just, coming into the new year a few weeks ago, as it feels. So things are moving really, really fast. So what is the sense of positioning now as we come up to Agenda 2030? I know, people are working on this already, but what's your insight? What's your sense of priorities that are coming, or things that need to be done? So maybe we'll just whiz around. Shall I go around the other way? Start with you, Jim, and come back to Harro and Alice. Just start there as you've got the floor.
So you're absolutely right. Things are moving at pace. And I think if we're brutally honest, our agenda for 2030 is not going to have realized all the goals that had been set. And so on the one hand, it's about accelerating those actions that might get us closer to attainment, but recognizing that the global community through the UN has to start the discussion about the post-2030 agenda. Is it an extension? Do we put the date of attainment for the 17 goals to 2035? Or do we say some of the trade-offs that had to be made in order to frame the 2030 set, they are the cause of many of the reasons why we haven't made the goal that we set? And can we reframe some of those political tensions that led to perhaps ambiguities across the 17? I think there's a lot of high-level global political discussion that needs to take place.
And that's why I think higher education can step in and start saying what needs to be in the next iteration and so on. So Harro. Time is ticking.
I presume several of my colleagues are well aware of what may have started for post-2030 agenda. So I haven't had those coffee chats with them. I think it's important to have that discussion on an equal footing across the world, and it's quite hard. There are, in my sense, quite a few countries that really got pushed to the edge during the pandemic, and that might actually be fighting off a collapse. For myself, I lead an energy systems research group in a country that has up to 11 hours of power outages a day currently. And just in the news yesterday, we have 15 people who died of cholera because the drinking water was contaminated, actually near the capital city, previously known as Pretoria, across the world near Tshwane. So these kind of societal collapses in several of, or near collapses in several countries post-pandemic, I think need to be staved off. And then, so this cannot be a discussion by those who got through the pandemic unscathed and have resources to fight a war, only. So this is going to be a tricky one to make this an inclusive discussion. Already for the SDGs, whilst there had been a lot of participation from the Global South, when we hosted the Africa SDG Summit, in the run-up workshops, we very often heard, oh, but that's a Western agenda. And it's not. And it needed a former Undersecretary of the United Nations, who's an honorary professor in our Nelson Mandela School of Governance, who had co-shaped the Africa We Want 2063 document with African leaders to actually put that misconception to bed. But I think going forward, it might again be hard. So yeah, please have that discussion by making sure people who are falling behind don't fall behind.
Yeah, thank you, Harro. And Alice.
Yeah, I very much appreciate what Jim and Harro both had to say. And I think we're a long way off, but I do have to say that the SDGs have been a very, I think, effective PR campaign. Like it really has, they very effectively brought the world's attention to what needs to be done. There's a couple of things I would say. In Canada, we are making a strong effort towards reconciliation with our Indigenous communities. And the Indigenous communities are not universally supportive of the Sustainable Development Goals. They weren't consulted. And so I think that perhaps moving forward, that might be something that's considered by the UN in reviewing the SDGs. Because I don't think 2030 can come and they can say, okay, well, it's not this anymore, right? I think that has to go on. But also I note that we're learning as we go. And so we recently, our university, along with several international partners, just brought the world's focus onto the role of the ocean in climate change. So the ocean absorbs 40% of all the Earth's carbon. And the North Atlantic is the largest of the carbon sinks, and in fact absorbs more carbon than all the world's rainforests combined. And no country in the world has taken the ocean into account in their climate targets. And so we're just realizing this now and bringing the world's attention to it and we are getting a lot of traction. We've been at the COPs, COP 26, 27. But people have not taken that, and the ocean isn't storing as much carbon. And if it stops storing carbon, or, the worst happens and it starts emitting carbon, that's it for human life. So I think it has brought a kind of, but nobody talked about this when the SDGs came out. There were probably some ocean scientists who did, but now we've really been able to work with the goals to bring the world's attention to what's happening. So hopefully we're getting better at doing what we're doing, but also perhaps some more consultation with First Peoples.
Very good. Yeah, and just on Harro and your points there around, the broader agenda of kind of sustainability and how it's showing up in different kinds of contexts. Just a shout out to the ISCN, who we took our last webinar in this series was actually advancing sustainability in fragile context. And we had authors from the book who are from Aruba, Brazil, Lebanon and Nepal, and so that is on the ISCN website. There are a couple of questions coming in. I see David is back with us. I know we're coming up to time, so I'm just going to check David's sound and see if he can give us some final comments. If not, so David, if we can unmute and see if we've got sound now. Yeah, I'm not sure if you can hear me. So I think maybe we can just give you each just a 30-second shout out to think about a question from Ole here, just as you're, close off your comments, really is how do we move this agenda, as Ole puts, beautifully in their question, how do we move it from something extra that's been talked about outside the lecture hall? How do we genuinely mainstream this as a critical part of our contribution through the teaching, learning that we do, through the research, innovation that we do, through the community and civic engagement work that is, the fabric, all of those three pillars. How do we connect those? So it's cruel to do this, but it's good. In the last couple of comments from each of you. So maybe I'll start with you, Alice, just to give us a sense of how do we bring this front and center, and just make your final remarks. And
yeah, look, if we don't do it, the students will demand it of us. Right? They are educated, they understand it, and we've got to oops, maybe we can just yeah so I think that it behooves us to learn about this and to do it, and to really think about using it as a framework for your strategies, including your academic strategy and your curricular strategy. But yeah, if we drag our feet, we will be taken there by the students.
Fantastic. Thank you. Harro.
I've given only one response in the chat, and given that we're close on time, I'll just say that's just one of many responses. This question has been asked in many places, and I think there is a whole array of ways that this can be done.
Thank you, Harro. And I agree, the accreditation bodies, as you've replied here, very powerful role in incorporating sustainability into curricula. It's Harro, to Ole, and to all of you. So Jim.
Just very briefly then, absolutely endorse the listen to students. They do get it, they are deeply concerned, but also staff. Staff are equally concerned and aware. And so those are powerful motivators. And just to pick up on the point about incorporation into curricula. A year or two back, I had the pleasure of co-chairing an initiative by the Quality Assurance Agency and Advance HE in the UK to develop the UK higher education guidance on education for sustainable development. Although you have to be a member to get the full document, you can get an abridged version of that document on the QAA or the Advance HE websites in the UK. And that is a fantastic insight into how you can incorporate into each and every single discipline of your institution. And the benchmark statements that are produced in the UK for disciplines, they now have a requirement to explain how the benchmark statement for the discipline, whether that's accountancy, engineering, nursing, or any of the other hundreds of benchmark statements, how are you embracing ESD within your discipline? There's lots out there that will help. And of course, by reading Wendy and Janet's book, you'll get even more insights on how to do it.
Thanks so much. And I didn't set him up to say that, but appreciate that. So can I thank you, for giving up your time? Can we also thank David for an hour and a half of struggling with technology to be with us? So David, you were with us in spirit. We could see you. I read out some of the key messaging from your fantastic chapter, which is a call to action for all the universities, but specifically for those in Nigeria. So thank you for your efforts. Thank you for your authorship. Thank you to Alice, to Jim, to Harro for your chapters, but for telling the stories of your universities in a way that was humble and was really to support our collective and global learning. So appreciate that. And can I thank the ISCM for supporting this webinar series? This is the last in the series. And thank Jen for getting up at stupid o'clock early and being with us and being such a great supporter. So thank you all for your efforts. Do keep in touch with ISCN and with all of us if we can be helpful. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.